The 14th Doctor has burst onto screen with not quite the actual 60th anniversary specials yet, but with Destination Skaro, a Children in Need charity special minisode. Meanwhile, the 14th Doctor's first story, Liberation of the Daleks, has concluded. That was, of course, the comic run in Doctor Who magazine. Meanwhile again, Doctor Who Unleashed, the behind-the-scenes show replacing Doctor Who Confidential from that previous incarnation of New Who, has returned. And within that Doctor Who Unleashed behind-the-scenes video for Destination Skaro, amidst all the froth and frippery of this, quote, not a comedy skit, unquote, comedy minisode, there are seeds of important and interesting conversations. So, before RTD2, Russell T Davies' second era, starts in earnest with the Star Beast, we're going to have a discussion about the 14th Doctor, the new minisode, new conversations RTD and Fandom are having, and, well, how else would you two frame this conversation we're about to have? You two are, of course, Ingiga from England and Missy from New Zealand. Ingiga, how would you frame it?
I'd say we're going to be dealing with maybe the first big discourse outbreak of the new era before it's even begun.
What do you think, Missy? Do you agree with that?
Yes, I think there's a big thing to be talked about, and it has been already discussed to death. So it does bode interestingly for what's about to come.
One way to start this is some Doctors jump right into action with, like, if you think of the 11th Doctor, even though the very first thing we really see him in his first episode was something recorded way later than the rest of it. I mean, the bit where he's, in the TARDIS and he's flying over, the city and he's getting into little scrapes and nearly hitting things as he's going. That's the first thing we really see of him in his first episode. But then you get, he sees Amelia and the story starts going. And his beginning is really linked into lots of his story over his run, isn't it? That's one way to do it. It's not the way it has to be done, of course. It's just one way it sometimes is done. And some Doctors start in a much more, like, you look at the second Doctor to the third Doctor and you can fit all sorts of things in there with how that was done, and some people do. The 14th Doctor has had a sort of confused start, in a way, I suppose. First of all, a few people were expecting him. That was part of the whole game of the vagaries of how Shooty was announced and then how all that played out with the media. So he burst into the power of the Doctor in a sort of surprise. And then there was all that vaunting about Doctor Who magazine is going to show the first story of him. And so we had 13 issues of Liberation of the Daleks, that comic.
It was 14, actually. Remember, they added an issue.
Which leads into this minisode, Destination Skaro, done for Children in Need. Gig, you're probably the best to describe Children in Need, being a Brit. How would you describe all that?
Okay, well, Children in Need is a yearly telethon where you see a lot of TV personalities and characters from all sorts get together to do a big event where they raise money for charity, basically, Children in Need. So there are frequent inserts during the show kind of showing the effect that, like, the charity can have, and, like, the different children of in all kinds of different needs around the country. Basically, and it's all about, I mean, it's basically what you kind of expect, I think, of a charity telethon, and it's a big, wholesome, family-friendly sort of event. And Doctor Who has a yearly fixture in it, typically. So not every year it doesn't always manage to get, like, a full mini-sode together, but when it doesn't, maybe it'll have a clip or a trailer or something like that in.
Because I remember from RTD1 we had Time Crash, which Stephen Moffat wrote, with Peter Davison meeting the first David Tennant, and we had...
Born Again was Children in Need, right?
Yeah, Born Again.
Yeah, Born Again, well, whatever you want to call it. This is a similar thing to what I was just saying, wasn't it? David Tennant's first story as the Doctor, I guess, wasn't the Christmas Invasion so much as this little Children in Need interquill between the parting of the ways and the Christmas Invasion. So there's kind of this tradition of, let's do a minisode, which is like within the actual storytelling of the show, but it's not an essential thing for viewers into the next series or whatever. And we can play a little more fast and loose with the rules. Like, I think Time Crash is operating... I think Stephen Moffat's taking that script very seriously in a lot of ways, but it's kind of operating in a different plane of reality than he would write an actual episode. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think there's a conscious awareness that you can be a bit more meta, maybe. I think because it's kind of like a special thing playing to an audience of, I guess, people who come here to see some Doctor Who goodness rather than necessarily a full true installment of Doctor Who. I think there was a bit more playing to the crowd, maybe that's how you might describe it. A bit more willingness to kind of wink at the audience, should we say.
I think that's like exactly the same thing that happens in This current minisode that just happened, but in the opposite way. We're playing to the crowd, but not the different kind of humour than Time Crash did.
And my last thought before really marching into the actual minisode is, I think Christmas specials have a similar thing to what Gig is saying, where there's that knowledge from the writer that it's to a different audience than your main audience generally, but where the Christmas specials still sometimes go really dark, even knowing they're going to be watched by more people than usual and not fans as well. The minisodes for children in need, I think that would be a weird direction. Like, it's, given the charities it's running for and everything like that, it would be weird to do like a dark thing or like a very lore-y thing, which is why I think they tend to, some of them are really well written. Like, I think Time Crash is great, but they tend to play lightly. That's kind of the idea as I take it. Would you agree, Gig?
Yeah, in this case, it would be surrounded by clips of Basil Brush, and and there was a whole thing of these puppets from various famous British kids shows and stuff doing MasterChef, just all kinds of skits like that. Just very, very light-hearted, frothy stuff. The only dark bits in Children in Need are when we actually get the clips of real children around the world.
Yeah.
And even those have kind of a light-hearted, optimistic resolution to them typically. So yeah, generally these minisodes are going to be comedy-focused, kind of banter-focused silliness, basically.
I think that's useful to say because also I guess now more than ever as well, Doctor Who having such an international push, stuff like this gets received, I think, in different ways. There are lots of fans not in the UK who might just see this as another minisode, the same way they might see, I don't know, whatever other minisode you want to talk about from the previous incarnation of New Who. So I think that's useful context, is that this is, it's real. Obviously it's being taken seriously. RTD, in his Instagram post talking up and announcing the minisode, actually said, quote, "not a comedy skit." So obviously there's a level of seriousness and reality. They're not just they're not taking the piss with it exactly, but still that context is useful, that it is going to be lighter and looser than usual. The thing is, something double the length of the minisode came out with the minisode as well, which was the Doctor Who Unleashed behind the scenes video that came out with it on iPlayer, now that we're returning to having this kind of behind the scenes show like Doctor Who Series 1 through Series 6 in New Who, the previous incarnation, had. And I think a lot of what we're going to talk about is we've got this comedic minisode, which, even name checks the word canon, it's having fun. And then we've got this behind the scenes video, which part of it is, fun. Part of it is very successful banter with the host and various actors. And part of it is Russell T Davies being super serious about certain things. And I think that's gotten really confused over a lot of conversations that are being had. But anyway, enough tiptoeing. Let's talk about the minisode itself. What happens in it?
So, okay, well, I was about to say, some of the Imperial officers from the Star Trek sequel trilogy walk in, and they start doing their thing, having a bit of awkward kind of dialogue with each other, because, one's a bit stroppy and one's really awkward and doesn't know what they're doing. And they walk in and they find them, well, they don't find, okay, so basically immediately these two characters we don't necessarily initially recognise walk in, and we find that one of them is called Mr. Castavillian, and the other one is Davros, who is now walking on two legs, which we haven't seen him do before, and played by Julian Bleach, as he has been in his previous New Who appearances. And Davros is showing off his Mark III travel machine, which is a very early version of the Dalek as we recognise it from Genesis of the Daleks, but instead of a plunger, it's got this claw thing on it. So Davros starts talking in a quite pronounced accent about the glories of this new travel machine, and then his friend or his new apprentice or whatever, Mr. Castavillian, starts suggesting possible names for it, which he does to a great success. Very, very funny gag. And Davros is not impressed with the lines and with the suggestions, and Davros leaves. The TARDIS crashes in all of a sudden, which, as we might know if you've been reading the Liberation of the Daleks comic, is because his fast return switch broke and sent him careening back to Skaro. So that's a bit of extra continuity for you there. So the TARDIS crashes into the room and snaps off the claw from the Mark III travel machine. And as the Doctor stumbles out, starts babbling in his usual fashion to his brand new friend, Mr. Castavillian, he ends up inadvertently just spilling stuff that isn't supposed to be spilled, and really awkwardly finding himself trying to minimise the damage to the timeline that he's just caused, and ultimately doing what you'd expect, which is causing the past and doing all of that. So there you go.
Yeah. Missy, what do you think of it?
Considering that is a silly, frothy children in need charity telethon thing, but simultaneously it was like had proper serious things RTD wanted to introduce and say. I just thought it was kind of not funny and a bit boring. I didn't really like it that much. It wasn't like the worst thing in the world, but it wasn't. It was. I when it was finished, I just thought, oh, okay. I wonder why they did that. I mean, I know why. It was like children in need, but why that?
Wow, that's not the reaction I was expecting from any viewer of it. I want to read out that Instagram post RTD did for the minisode just to kind of frame it really clearly. So he said, "The Doctor, Daleks, Skaro, this Friday as part of Children in Need, starring, amongst others," I list the actors, and then he says, not in capitals, not a comedy skit, a fully scored and FX'd 5-minute scene produced by Scott Hancock. He talks about the director, he talks about Murray Gold doing the music. The new Hooniverse arrives on Friday, 17th of November. Worldwide, no idea, my monkeys. But if you can, please contribute to the most wonderful cause. Heart plus blue square. So, why did he say not a comedy skit?
He was hyping this up a fair amount, I think. There's a possibility that he was kind of taking the piss in saying that. But also, I think when he says not a comedy skit, I think maybe what he also means is it's not just something that they slap together in like 2 seconds, right? I mean, he's right. It is fully FX'd, fully scored, if you can call it that. 5-minute scene. It's scripted. It's got acted. It's got some, decent set and lighting design as well. It's got an effects shot. It's got all kinds going on. So it's fully made at Bad Wolf. It's a real piece of television, for what it's worth. I think maybe the extent to which he maybe hyped it up a bit, and factoring in that obviously he wants people to watch and donate to children in need as well. So that's fair. But also, I think maybe it creates some misaligned expectations with regards to what this is. Because I think watching it, what it comes off to me is that I feel RTD is maybe getting a bit stretched thin this month with some of this content that he's producing. Because we think, you consider he's doing the second series of Ncuti Gatwa at the moment. And yet this month, because it's the 60th anniversary, we've got Tales of the TARDIS going on. He did a minisode for that as well. Now you've got a minisode for this here. And it's like, does he actually... does he need to be doing all of this? I wonder. Because I feel, in terms of this minisode itself, I'm kind of with Missy. I didn't find it super funny. I think there are some mildly amusing notes in it. I like the Doctor kind of bumbling out and being like, "Hey, my new friend, it's you," to a complete stranger. And I think the basic gag of the Doctor inadvertently, like, just saying things without thinking and then realising he's, dug his hole deeper and made the situation even worse. I think that's a basic gag, that's fine. But like some of the other gags, like the whole anagram of Khaled thing, rather, where Mr. Casavillian goes through all 5 different anagrams of Khaled and they're all really bad, and Davros says no to every single one. That's a bit interminable. I think generally it's not really on fire with the gags. That's all I can say there.
I think a problem about the fact that it's light on gags is that it's not really heavy on anything else. And which, I mean, it's again, I'm being really mean to this Children in Need charity minisode, and I need to couch why I need to understand that I don't really care that much. It's fine that it's nothing, but it feels like this is properly the 14th Doctor's introduction to a lot of people, in a way that Born Again wasn't for the 10th Doctor. Because this is big new Disney Who, new series, new era. We see first time new David Tennant on screen since the Power of the Doctor cliff. And it's just sort of there. It feels like this is the kind of minisode we'd get in between his second and third series, if he were to be staying for them, where we'd be like, oh, it's nice to see him again, not, oh, it's nice to see him for the first time. And so, for me, it felt a bit weird.
This has gone out on YouTube as the 14th Doctor has arrived.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't say this is just a little children in need minisode, please disregard. It's not that context there. So it is positioned in a way that maybe doesn't flatter it so much, because it's being given more expectations than it can really handle, and certainly more than is proportionate to the effort that's been put into writing it, I think is fair.
I think the issue is the obvious way to dismiss everything you two are saying is well, it's a joke. It's just the joke. It's funny. But is it like when you look at Time Crash, I would call that funny because it's not just that like I subjectively find the humor more appealing. It's that it has more jokes. If you could mathematically work this out. Destination Skaro is 5 minutes long. Time Crash is 8 minutes long, but you could work out the joke per minute rate between them, right? The new joke per minute rate. How many jokes are in... I know how absurd this sounds to do this, but how many jokes are in Destination Skaro?
3.
3? 3, basically.
And I know we're comparing Moffat, who's, I think RTD can be incredibly funny. I think he can be an incredibly great comedic writer, but he's not an actual, he hasn't done multiple purely comedy shows the way that Moffat has. Like, Moffat is a sitcom writer in a way. RTD is a writer of other things, more successfully. So I'm not... that's just going to be a difference between the two of them. But I didn't like the type of humor heaps, and I also just found the humor really repetitive. I know the anagram, I saw lots of people respond really well to that, to hearing the different Dalek anagrams, and they found that really funny, and that's great. I just didn't find it funny to keep hearing different ones. You know what I mean? And I need to be so clear that I'm sure this is true for you two as well. When I'm saying this isn't me channeling some hatred to do with what the minisode is doing through a little tangible detail like the jokes. It's not that at all. I don't care about the plunger thing at all, personally. I know some people care, but for me, the minisode even says the word canon. It's not really trying to... I don't think RTD is... The same way, Moffat with the handbrake joke with the TARDIS, and some people had so much consternation over that when River's Song said, the iconic warp noise is just because he left the handbrake on. Some people really hated that, and I get the hate, but I don't think it was that serious. I don't think Moffat was really trying to say that and destroy your dreams of that being, the magical TARDIS sound. The same way, I don't think anything this is doing to the lore, the actual minisode, is a huge actual thing RTD is trying to do. There is something, of course, we'll talk about, but I think that's more from the confidential Unleashed episode. So I'm not channeling grief and rage over what it did, because I don't mind what it did.
No, yeah, same.
I'm just actually not laughing at the jokes, basically. It's great that it is funny for some people, but for me, I just found it really repetitive. And I've got nothing against frothy jokes. I love Time Crash a lot. And Born Again, I don't think it's the funniest thing in the world, but it moves on. It does its jokes, and then it tries to do a bit of drama between Rose and the 10th Doctor and how he looks now. I know it's longer than Destination Skaro, but it tries to do a couple of different things. I don't think it's awesome, that minisode. I think the physical comedy is pretty lame, but at least it's got a few more strands, I suppose. And the thing with this type of humor it's doing is, the big Spider-Man No Way Home movie where there's the 3 Spider-Men and, they're bringing back all these villains. There's a sequence in that really stuck with me, is really crystallizing a type of humor that I hate. And it's when the kids, the young MCU Spidey and MJ and I think his friend Ned hanging around the villains from the Raimi films, and they learn that Doc Ock's name is Otto Octavius, and they start saying your name is Otto Octavius, and they start doubling over in laughter, and they're just laughing that is because he's got 8 arms. They're just laughing that his name is Otto Octavius, and it couldn't be less funny to me. That sort of thing. I just don't think it's funny. It's crappy 90s stand-up observational comedy. It's just saying, hey, that's what that's called. And yeah, he's got 8 arms and he's an octopus. I feel like that's what this minisode is doing with the Daleks, basically.
Yeah, because we said there were 3 jokes, but really the 3 jokes are just one joke. Much simpler. Which is that, isn't old Dalek stuff funny? Haha, the name's an anagram. Haha, they have a sink plunger. It's yes, that is funny. That's not enough to fill 5 minutes.
It can be really, old poking fun at old lore and stuff can be really funny. There's hugely funny jokes you could do with, having Spider-Man characters together. There's hugely funny jokes you can do with old Dalek stuff. I've seen them done in New Who before. It's just, hey, it's a plunger, from the bathroom, or Dalek can be spelt in different ways. I don't think it's a deep well.
The strangeness of it is that even though we just talked so much about how this is a children in need minisode, it's going out to a wider audience, it's not necessarily that directed at the core hardcore fans. But nonetheless, the humour in this seems to coast on fanishness a lot, and almost like a preoccupation with fanishness. Because like the few jokes that are in here, and one of them is a mention of canon, right? And the fact that this minisode is being very flippant about like canon and the right order of things, and like, the sanctity of the order of things and how things are supposed to have happened, by having, the 14th Doctor barge in and sort of mess things up. And the thing is that in itself is something that only fans will care about. And the whole thing of going back to the genesis of the Daleks, and the Doctor name drops genesis of the Daleks in this minisode, that is intensely fanish stuff. And it is really odd, because it just seems like, why are like fans, I mean, especially picky fans, becoming like the protagonists of this whole conversation? Because it doesn't seem to have started here either. Because remember, a while back, RTD wrote that column, there's a letter from the showrunner thing, where he recounted this imaginary example of what would be going on in a fan's head watching the start of the next episode, The Star Beast. And at the end, the punchline is that he's only covered 30 seconds in the whole column. And I think that's a pretty funny piece of writing, and it's more involved than this was. But nonetheless, there seems to be this whole thing of like the hyperactive kind of picky fan is like this imp on RTD's shoulder who's constantly like shrieking into his ear, and RTD has to try and exorcise that demon by forever kind of like just mocking and like skewering that, the fans who care about canon, and they're gonna hate that I'm renumbering the series. God, how controversial is that going to be? It's like, man, who actually cares about any of this? I don't. God, what is the deal?
Yeah, I support generally like tons of that stuff he's doing anyway. It's just kind of the self-aware percolating in it that I find like slightly weird. Like, we can just move on and do what you're doing, rather than kind of, I don't know if it's necessarily arrogant. It's just kind of awkward to me. The kind of, like, I thought that letter was very funny, the self-aware fan thing, but I just think we're kind of swimming in it a bit now. And yeah, how do you feel about that, Missy?
It reminds me of a little quote from Community, from season 6, the RV episode. I don't remember the context, but Annie says to Arbet that we're all on your side, so if you're on your side too, then it's petty. It's like, yeah, like, we know those fans are silly, and like, their like interminable focus on the canon and how it's like, it's ridiculous. Like, we know they're silly. It's like mocking it. Yes, it's funny, but it's also like, we get it.
All that discussion on the comedy, I know that segment of this discussion is going to come across as so absurd and insane and melancholy to so many listeners, but I'm sure there's going to be a couple who are like, thank God someone else didn't laugh. Because I know when I saw you two not find it funny as well, that felt very cathartic for me. When, tons of our other friends found it funny, that's awesome. There's stuff I find funny that they don't find funny at all. I don't think there's no issues there. But sometimes now and again, it's nice to have that little brain connection of, someone else did or did not find that thing funny. That's a bit of a relief. Before
we necessarily move on, because just on the note of like the writing of the minisode and stuff, and I think just one more detail is that I think, and this is something that I think you can kind of see in his Tales of the TARDIS minisode as well, which I brought up earlier, is that the way the characters talk in this, like looking at Mr. Castavillian, for example, rather than having a real, specific voice, or like a very characterful voice that kind of lends itself to kind of humour and gags, I feel like all the characters in this are kind of just talking RTD speak. Because like how Mr. Castavillian starts talking in terms of like a thingamajig, and I mean he could just be like an anyone character just slotted into Skaro, and obviously for the purposes of comic minisode that's fine, but I feel like it starts to affect Davros as well. Like his final line in the minisode when he sees the plunger and he's like, whoa, he's having a revelation, like the plunger, it's perfect. What does he say? He says, I like it. He could be like a Disney character or something. He doesn't really feel very specific to Davros, I think, some of this dialogue. And like earlier on, when he's reacting with disdain to those proposed alternative names for the Dalek, he's just like, no. It's almost like the character doesn't have to be Davros for the lines of the humour to work. And it reminded me of like in the Tales of the TARDIS minisode with Peter Davison and Tegan, the Doctor saying things like, "Do we do tea? Did we do tea before?" I just think like, how was that ever a speech pattern that Doctor used? Like, it doesn't feel like it. Just feels like RTD speak again. So again, I think it's just a consequence of the minisodes feeling kind of like a writer stretched thin, just like really trying to get these out. So we have content for the 60th anniversary month. If you see where I'm coming from, it's rather than like super detailed, focused work.
I think that like ties into what I said earlier about how it feels like a weird introduction to the new Doctor, because it's the exact same with him. That just feels like generic Doctor, which again is fine for a Children in Need thing, but since it's the first we're seeing of David Tennant acting as the 14th Doctor. It just feels like, it feels a bit like nondescript.
Yeah, it's really frustrating to be getting this level of stuff before we get the actual episodes. So we have to swim in this like inertia.
Exactly. Like this is a weird first impression.
And all this stuff came a year later, more or less, which is why I'm trying to... This isn't really influencing what I'm expecting from the Star Beast and the other two specials, because this is a year later. This is effectively a different era. If anything, this should make you worry about the Shooty series, not the Tenet stuff, because, it's from a different time. But yeah. I liked the acting in the little special for what it's worth. The Castavillian, I think he did everything RTD needed him to do. He did all the comic reactions. Tennant is just... I enjoy watching him talk, I guess. And Julian Bleach is just, he's awesome.
He was pushing the accent this time, I noticed.
That I didn't like, but we'll tie into that later when we get more serious. But on that note, I think all that long discussion we just had of saying, well, we didn't laugh, that little tut-tutting session we just had, I think the actual use of that is to kind of presage that this was obviously trying to be funny, no matter the not a comedy skit. This is a real minisode, but this was trying to be funny. It was very frothy. It said the word canon. There were no big statements this minisode was making, right? This is very clearly lol, Daleks, humor. Anyone can laugh at this. Like, I think the measure of this is I knew if I sent this to certain friends I had that weren't that into the show, they'd laugh at it, and they did. Like, I knew it would work better for them than for me. So, very frothy, very light, very funny, maybe? Not to us, but to some. That's all great. That's the tone of it. Those are the themes of it. That's all set right. So if fans are freaking out over it, we can go, maybe we can have a little empathy sometimes and be like, well, that must be tough for you if, you care about the plunger a lot. I don't get it personally, but sure. But basically, it's not a big deal, the minisode. Any fans freaking out or having big conversations over this are probably just a bit too revved up from the 60th coming out so soon. If there was no paratext with this minisode, that would basically be it, right?
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
But there was. So it's great to have Doctor Who Confidential. I mean, it's not confidential. Now it's Unleashed back. But it feels like confidential. Like for Series 7 through Flux of New Who, what you got were like web extras. You get these little, sometimes more than one for an episode, but they'd just be tiny little web extras. And then in sometimes you would get slightly longer versions like on the home releases, but often they were just the web extras edited together. But basically they were very short content for behind the scenes of the episodes. And the thing with that is they were always kind of fast, or not one note as in being boring, but they would only really focus on one thing. Whereas confidential episodes, which could bloat from 30 to 40 to 45 to longer minutes, they had breathing room. Like the Matt Smith ones often are just Matt, Arthur, and Karen hanging out, basically. It's just kind of a comfy little sideshow. The RTD ones, they ran the gamut of what is every technical aspect of making the show we can kind of show off to fans. It was a really cool thing to watch as a kid, really walking through all these different... I think it's how I learned what ADR was. It's how I learned what loads of things were as a kid. Confidential has lots of breathing room. And that made that made an obvious return in this Unleashed episode, because the host got so much time to interview the actors, and he got to do his own little run of the minisode's comedy in, milk those gags for all they're worth. The ones about finding the TARDIS set somewhere, it got funnier every time they hit that note. So I sound sardonic there, but I actually do like that it has this breathing room, even if it means sometimes it's not as engaging as maybe the more short web extras were. I love that we have a little more room to play around, that we can have a behind the scenes episode twice the length of the content it's about. I think that's awesome. I'm really, really happy for that. I assume you guys are happy to get Unleashed as well.
Oh, very happy.
I like that we have a presenter with a very strong Welsh accent, even if his banter with some of the cast is a bit interminable, and some of the comments that the cast and the crew are making are a bit trite. I mean, that's not really necessarily new to Unleashed either. I think sometimes Confidential could get a bit like as well. So, I expect a lot more of that in Unleashed. But yeah. I mean, I appreciate having the show there, and I loved the detail where we saw how it was David Tennant's birthday. So when he was about to come out and do a take, everyone surprised him by singing "Happy Birthday." That was a lovely thing to see. I was really happy to see that.
I think a lot of the iffy stuff about what's the word? Unleashed sagging a little in this instance was due to the slimness of the Minnesota. So I'm really excited to see the Unleashed for the Star Beast. I think that'd be very, very interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, totally.
We've got a very frothy, not many jokes, but it's hitting those jokes a lot minisode. Then we've got this twice as long Confidential Unleashed behind the scenes video, which, like Gig is saying, like we're all saying, it goes into overlong banter, it goes into David Tennant's birthday. This is all fun and frothy, and you can probably watch while playing on your phone a little bit. It doesn't sound like that huge of a deal. But there's something in there. Isn't there? Amongst all this comedy, amongst all this froth, Russell decides to be very serious. The voiceover is saying, if the Doctor Who Children in Need special wasn't exciting enough, we also got to see the return of one of the most iconic Doctor Who villains, Davros. A brilliant scientist from the planet Skaro, Davros first appeared in Doctor Who in the 1975 story Genesis of the Daleks. He was depicted as a wheelchair user, with a disfigured face and a fanatical dedication to the Daleks. But on set today, Davros is looking quite different. And then we cut to Russell. And what Russell says is, we had long conversations about bringing Davros back because he's a fantastic character. Time and society and culture and taste has moved on, and there's a problem with the Davros of old in that he's a wheelchair user who's evil. And I had problems with that. And a lot of us on the production team had problems with that, of associating disability with evil. And trust me, there's a very long tradition of this. I'm not blaming people in the past at all, but the world changes, and when the world changes, Doctor Who has to change as well. And then we get a clip of Davros saying, we can evolve, we can start anew, we can become stronger. Then back to Russell. So we made the choice to bring back Davros without the facial scarring and without the wheelchair or his support unit, which functions as a wheelchair. I say, this is how we see Davros now. This is what he looks like. This is 2023. This is our lens. This is our eye. Things used to be black and white. They're not black and white anymore. And Davros used to look like that, and he looks like this now. And that we are absolutely standing by. I think because it's Children in Need Night, it's a night where issues of disability or otherness or being excluded from society come right to the front of the conversation. So of all of the nights to make this change, I think it was absolutely vital to do this, and I'm very, very, very proud of the fact that we have. And then the confidential episode moves back onto, the frothier tone.
Yeah, it goes straight back into banter with Tennant and the Daleks and stuff.
I think there's a couple of things to flag up here before we get into the actual meat and potatoes of all this. One is that accessibility-wise, the Unleashed episode, it's free on iPlayer, but obviously that's region-gated to the UK. Although the RTD on Davros bit I read out has been clipped around and shared a lot over social media. It's on Twitter, it's on YouTube, and there's all these articles reposting those actual comments RTD said, so it's not that hard to get to, really. Also, secondly, so much of how this minisode and ensuing conversations have been received and conducted has been such a huge case of wire crossing and weird assumptions, but I'm not fully blaming the audience for this either, because obviously a lot of it is the product of this confused way that it's all been conveyed. But I've seen countless loud declarations aghast at the quote-unquote discourse happening, making high and mighty judgments on how dare ye be reacting. This was a fun little minisode. Where is all this discourse from, you sillies? And a bunch of these comments are really clearly from people who aren't aware of the RTD disability comments at all, or they're just very dimly aware of them from osmosis, from headlines or social media. So they aren't really understanding not just the scope of the discussion, they don't know what discussion's being had in the first place. And I've also seen countless discussions and pronouncements where people think all this is just based on a misunderstanding on Davros walking around, in that these people think this is purely because Destination Skaro looks like it's pre-Genesis of the Daleks, so they think, well, this is just pre-Davros having to use a wheelchair and getting his facial scars. And so they think that therefore there's this lot of hysterical fans that have just invented whole cloth the idea that RTD's removed Davros' wheelchair usage forever. And therefore these fans think all the fans talking about disability and some of them shrieking about that are bizarre and silly for being so hyperbolic about what they perceive as a simple misunderstanding of continuity and how prequels work, where of course those fans are the ones looking silly for not really scanning what people are all talking about. But then again, is that silly when RTD's communicated it in such an odd way? there's a lot of confusion and people talking past each other is what I'm saying. The weirdest comments I've seen are the ones that are like, I might be wrong, or I'm not totally sure, but I think RTD blah, 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 blah. And then they launch into their own bizarre personal misunderstandings born of like swimming around in the discourse, but not actually taking a couple of seconds to like Google or Twitter search what everyone's actually talking about. I don't know why I've seen scores and scores and scores of comments like that. But anyway, so many people are kind of missing the point as well by talking so much about in-universe justifications and explanations for Davros walking, when a lot of these people I have actually watched the clip and everything. So RTD is clearly talking about an extremely out-of-universe thing, a very out-of-universe, real-world motivation. He's not talking about a textural pull. He's not trying to law wank or canon weld or anything here. He's speaking to a cultural trope he wants to undo, not recontextualize. But anyway. And third, lastly, it's worth clarifying, none of us three use a wheelchair. So this is not the Davros change was great, and we have the ethos to support that kind of discussion. And it's not the Davros change was misjudged, and we have the lived experience to speak to that kind of discussion. This is much more a meta discussion about how Russell communicated this change and his intent regarding it, how fandom has been receiving that, and how all that speaks to certain trends in RTD showrunning, in fandom discourse, and of course in wider cultural attitudes as well. Anyway, what are the thoughts of you two guys?
I think another part of that is that the immediate reaction of everyone, I think, watching the minisode for the first time, so before The Unleashed came out, and when they saw Davros walking on two legs, I think the natural response to that, given the setting of the minisode pre-Genesis of the Daleks, is that, oh, okay, I guess this is before his accident.
Yeah.
That's what basically everyone thought watching the minisode. Okay, I guess this is just Davros before he had his accident. This is chronologically earlier. We're seeing a Davros that we haven't seen before his accident. Okay. And because of that, watching the minisode does not actually achieve or convey what it is that RTD is actually saying in that behind the scenes clip, what he wants to actually convey there, in likening the transition from black and white to colour to what he's done here. Is that, RTD saying, actually, we want to update the concept of Davros, like, period, like full tilt, like, universally, overall, rather than just say, this is just one example of him before his wheelchair. They're saying we're not doing him with a wheelchair anymore, like, period.
I've seen a lot of smart people not understand or even have heard what he's saying there, and I think it's because of this confused context, or the froth of the minisode, the froth of most of the Unleashed. I think either people aren't listening, or they like just outright haven't heard it, and then it's all getting conflated because people are seeing, some of the classic fans RTD is really obsessed with at the moment get annoyed at the plunger retcons, and they think, these fans don't even understand, this is just pre-Genesis of the Daleks. And then I see a lot of people kind of half get, I think, what RTD is saying, but then be like, well, they can make it work in canon by maybe the regeneration energy in The Witch's Familiar heals his legs, so that's why he won't need the wheelchair support unit anymore. And I feel like it's people are missing the point, but I'm not judging them. What I'm judging is I think this was a quite bizarre way to kind of announce what RTD. It can put him completely aside what you think of what RTD is doing here. I think this was a really confusing way to announce it. Basically, it's in the middle of a frothy behind the scenes video about a very frothy charity special. RTD's making a really big declarative statement that he's very proud of. He's being completely serious there, and it's all getting confused and reconfigured in kind of, I think, how this has been done. Yeah,
I think the thing is we don't have a concrete example, a really clear, unambiguous example of what it is RTD kind of envisions, because the nature of the short as being set, earlier than any of the characters' on-screen appearances, kind of gives it like a get out clause, hence, how, like I just said earlier, everyone watching it didn't realize this is what RTD was even doing. So it's really hard to judge what RTD's actual intentions are from this, because we don't really know what, if anything, he wants to do with the character going forward, like in actual news stories, or, even flashbacks to previous stories. I see speculation that will he edit scenes from Genesis and Stolen Earth to digitally erase the wheelchair and just sort of retcon out the wheelchair from having ever been there. Because that wouldn't be out of line with what RTD kind of describes in terms of changing from black and white to color and so on. But we don't have a concrete example of that, so we just don't know what it is he wants to do or conceives of getting away with doing or could be bothered to do. And I think the kind of things that people are maybe imagining or conceiving with that are fundamentally quite naughty things, because they involve trying to go back and change past stories and stuff, or do all kinds of things, or maybe potentially have things happen like you described, like Davros regenerating, or God knows what. And all of that, it's so naughty, and it's so either backwards looking or like law related, and it's so overwhelming, I think, that people are just having to imagine all kinds of things when all we actually have to go on is this very short and frothy minisode.
The thing is also, is he even going to use Davros again?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
He's used him for this minisode. He turned down writing the Trial of Davros Series 9 premiere, as it was originally conceived anyway. Moffat always used to offer, are you going to write for me this year? Are you going to write for me this year? And from that Showrunner Showdown Doctor Who magazine they did a few years ago, my impression was that Davros one might have been the closest RTD got to, properly considering it, but he still didn't do it. And Moffat, did his own instead. Moffat has a role to play here, actually, I think, in all this discourse. But if he was interested in Davros, I think he would have done him differently in Series 4, and I think he might have done him in Series 9 if he was that interested.
Yeah.
He doesn't strike me as that interested in Davros, and I think the most confusing way to handle this would be to do this minisode, say what he said, and then, it's like those memes of a Chad that walks out of the situation, after they've, said something really impactful. I think that may be what Russell is doing here, which would be interesting. Obviously, in RTD2 itself, we're getting characters in wheelchairs that I presume are going to be a positive representation. So he's moving very much forward with positive representation side of things. But in the kind of rewiring negative representation, is this it? It's interesting to think. And I think the most confusing thing will be if it's not kind of revisited, which I think is possible.
Yeah. And it'll just feel like a weird, tiny island in a sea of nothingness of this one tiny Davros minisode that's disconnected from everything else, that is also a big declarative statement on the character. This is how we do Davros now. I'm not going to do him ever again, but this is the point I'm at. It also feels weird since it's right next to the latter half of the minisode, which is full of the Doctor and basically RTD laughing at people who haha, look, we're doing silly stuff to the canon with the plunges and genesis of the Daleks, and then at the beginning being like, oh, we're doing this very serious, genuine retcon engagement with how the show works, and we're changing it, and that one isn't a joke. And so it makes it feel, it just feels weird, yeah. Yeah,
it risks coming off as almost too self-congratulatory, considering how, I guess, non-committal the treatment of Davros here actually is. I mean, because it's just a comedy skit doing surface-level 70s fan wank, Genesis of Daleks, we're here, so, like you said, like you described, Neo, if this actually is just it's just going to be like, what the hell was the point? Yeah, it just, compared to actual, I guess, positive examples of, representation, we've got Ruth Madeley coming in with a new era and all that, and potentially hypothetically a hypothetical new Davros story that actually, I guess, builds on this in some way. Those would be things to make really big declarative statements about. Whereas here, it's just you're kind of, are you not huffing your own farts a bit too much, given what you've actually done is so minimal that many people didn't even notice it when they watched the minisode? Yeah, there it is.
If no one can notice what you're doing in the actual minisode, because for all the world it just appears like this is what have you done exactly? You need to have watched a Twitter clip of the second third of the confidential minisode to get what you were trying to do. I just find that pretty confusing. Okay, I think we've framed a lot of why this is a confusing topic a lot now. On the actual idea of what he's talking about there, the classic thing, we talk about this a lot because it happens so much with the sort of stuff we talk about on air. The thing we're seeing a squillion permutations of right now, I'm sure you've both seen this loads in your own travels, is fans will find one or two people who have the most the most credibility, the most reason to listen to them on these sorts of things. People in wheelchairs, basically. Fans will find one or two or three that are saying the opinions they want to have, and then they'll glom onto that with, they say this, so, and then they might use that to attack someone who's disagreeing with them. If you really hate this, if you're Davros needs to be in the support unit and he needs to have the facial scars, and for whatever reasons motivating you, maybe you just like look better, maybe you are like super anti-progressive and like hate what RTD is doing here and you want to kind of package that in a different way. Obviously, there's going to be plenty of fans in wheelchairs that dislike what RTD is doing here. And so you can go find them and say, well, they say it's bad, so it's bad, so, edit you. And then, of course, you got the other side where if you support this or you think this feels good, then you can find fans in wheelchairs who think this is awesome and really support what RTD is doing. And then you can use them. And I hate to be like on the fence here, but both sides suck there, right? It's just kind of tokenistic. You're just kind of grabbing at, where's a person in a wheelchair that I can use to defend my opinion? How can I make my opinion seem like the right one by finding the right person with the right opinion in the right wheelchair? I just think it's so gross. We've talked about this with lots of other things here, but I'm seeing people really loudly do it. And then I'm seeing the pretty funny exchanges where I've seen people like take one of those sides and like choose their pet person they're going to use to like defend their opinion they have, and then get confronted by someone who uses a wheelchair who has a different opinion. And then the discombobulation I've seen some places online where if you've gone so gung-ho one side to say, well, these people are evil, the people that do or don't like this, that have the opposite opinion of my wheelchair person, they're evil and they're blah, 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 blah. And then when you get someone else in a wheelchair saying, but I think the opposite opinion, it's just pretty funny, I think, to watch the hand-wringing of how do you navigate that when you came down so hard on a topic you don't really have much to do with, you don't have any authority with, you don't have any real connection to. I think people are speaking very loudly and very authoritatively on things they can't really understand. And so I just find it kind of gross to try and grab at a person. And then I think it's pretty funny when you realize, wait, there's not one monolith wheelchair, association that are all going to agree or disagree with RTD, because this is a real thing. Like, this isn't just to do with how you prefer your Davros and your Docky Who. Like, these are actual issues you're talking about. So there's actually a multiplicity of perspectives, and it's never going to be settled one way or the other. This isn't an easy thing you can use just to defend how you prefer your Doctor Who canon, basically.
I think it is worth noting, like, Doctor Who isn't leading the way with this kind of thing. Like, in 2018, like, the BFI decided to stop giving funding to films that had facial disfigurements as a signifier of villainness, like facially disfigured villains and stuff. They're like, we're not funding projects like this anymore. We're not doing it. We want to down with this sort of thing. So, like, this is like this is a kind of thing that more and more like actors within like the media kind of been waking up to and kind of making changes on. So it's not like, this really isn't like a Doctor Who fan sort of thing. I think a lot of fans will kind of miss that. Certainly, as far as RTD is concerned, this is a general population oriented move, right? So this is not about kind of the feelings of fans regarding how much they love an individual bit of the show, or how much they like might want it to be changed or not want it to be changed. It's kind of irrelevant, I think, like our love of an individual bit of Doctor Who, because the RTD is potentially, he's talking about this in terms of how do we not alienate like disabled viewers, and those viewers could be anywhere. They don't have to be within the fandom. They're not necessarily people who have opinions on Davros or like a fondness for like the nuanced journey of Davros as documented in Big Finish, right? I think it's almost like, I know this is really tough for fans to kind of, I guess, even comprehend, but often I think sometimes with stuff like this, the fan point of view is almost disqualifying because it's like it's too much bias to bring in, like this attachment to pre-existing fan stuff. When RTD is operating from a perspective of, well, actually you have to distance yourself from the fanish attachments here, because we're talking about the whole, not just the whole country, and potentially the whole world, really. Like, anyone could be a possible viewer here. So it's almost like having to actually, stoically remove yourself from how you feel about stuff as a fan, and think about it like pragmatically as like just as a person, like as a human being. Yeah,
because if you like, I've seen a lot of people who are arguing that that Davros should have always stayed in the wheelchair, and if people bring up how this is a like it's a recurring thing, it's a trope that's like a negative thing in media, people will respond with, oh, but I can't think of many other Doctor Who villains that are like that. And it's like, it's not just about Doctor Who. This is about
And I can as well. I can think of plenty other Doctor Who villains like that.
Yeah, there's loads. Something else, it's kind of similar in a certain way to, not to bring this up again after it's finally died down, but Costume Gate, where RTD was looking at something that's an integral part of the show, but looking at it from completely devoid from like a fan perspective, and like how the lore works and how things in Doctor Who should be, and trying to like consider just like a regular person perspective. Like the same discussions arose out of it between people who were like, oh, it needs to stay like this, or no, it needs to change. And then there was also the same thing of people finding, you know, maybe a transgender person or a non-binary person, and who agrees with them and holding them up and saying, look, see, my
their pet one, yeah.
My opinion has more value because look, I've found a relevant person who agrees.
An interesting thing with this, because I think how Gig put it, it's kind of well, you're both saying this is actually very disconnected from Doctor Who in lots of ways. Missy is talking about the audience side of that, and Gig was kind of talking about this isn't like this didn't bubble up out of RTD or Doctor Who. This bubbled out of like real world trends and how real world actual industry things are shifting. I think the interesting thing there to think about is where do we go from here? I want to make it really clear that I'm not doing like a fanish slippery slope thing. Like I'm not afraid or against of anything I'm about to suggest. I'm just curious about like societally where this is tracking, because if we're starting down the like I think it's kind of crazy we're having these conversations where people are like learning about associations between disability and evil, but I guess I shouldn't, like if people are learning about that and that's, you know, affecting them, then I guess it's good they've learned about it. It's just mildly crazy to me you wouldn't have noticed, but no, I shouldn't judge. The same way that I know a lot of people are bringing up, well, RTD, you wrote Max Capricorn, and remember John Lumick? Like, you're hardly the one to be saying this, but like the whole point is people are allowed to improve, right? Like, what do you do? What do you want to happen if you're like bringing that stuff up? Would you rather you've not changed? I guess some people do, and that's why they're bringing it up. But the same way, I shouldn't be prejudiced when I'm kind of going bug-eyed at you've never noticed like an association between scars and evil. But anyway, if Doctor Who's tracking away from that, there's so much in Doctor Who connected to that I'm curious how some things will go. Like Daleks themselves are disfigured, you know, like humans more or less. I know they're not human, but you know what I mean. You look at the Dalek mutants that RTD used from his time, and you can see like the vestigial distorted faces on them, you know, not just the one eye. You can see where all that is. I think Daleks are going to get by because they're so externalized from the human form that I don't think they scan in any way as this is a person who their body has been changed in massive ways. I think they're different enough that nothing's going to change with them. Would you guys agree?
Yeah, I'd say so, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
This is all about the image of a person like in a chair, like actual types of people who you can actually see.
The one there, though, if Daleks get by fine, the Cybermen, that's hard. Especially when you look back at the 60s and where Cybermen actually came from, what Kit Pedler was drawing from and everything. Like, Cybermen are very predicated on this kind of fear of you know, of pacemakers and, you know, of bodily modification. I wonder there. I think they scan now so much as just kind of boring robots. Like, I hate that that's happened, but it has happened, that I guess they're so distanced from kind of their roots that maybe they get by fine, but they're kind of born from an area I think you could question if we're starting to question these things, don't you think?
Yeah, certainly. I don't expect to see Mondasian Cybermen appear in RTD2 the way they did at the tail end of Moff's run, at least, because certainly there was much more focus there on the idea these are hospital patients who have had bits of their bodies replaced, you know, for medical reasons, and you know, I mean, it's the whole concept of the scary hospital, isn't it? And actually, you know, if we're looking at it from a perspective that's like sensitive to the experience of people who have, you know, lost bits of their body and needed treatment, like, well, you know, this is just life. It's not necessarily like this like death, like evil scientist prison of hell. You know, there are more sensitive ways you can look at that stuff.
Body horror in general, which so much of the show has always been, you know, playing with the Zygons. Just I can't even do a list because it's such a, you know, mainstay of the show. Body horror in general, you can kind of, I think, question really in a way, can't you? Because isn't that all based on the idea of what if your body looked gross like that sort of body?
It might be like a subtler thing. Like maybe in RTD2 you won't be as likely to see stuff like, you know, in Forest of the Dead, I forget the character's name, but like the girl who ends up in the computer and becomes like a genius. And
Miss Evangelista, yeah.
Yeah, Miss Evangelista, that's it. And her face, kind of her facial features, kind of the computer kind of rearranges them. You know, I think maybe you might expect to see less stuff like that. Just rather than we will dramatically change specific iconic bits of Doctor Who iconography, it might just be more a trend of we will avoid this kind of thing more, we will lean away from this kind of thing more. And that might be how it ultimately ends up manifesting as a general thing.
Yeah, I'm not fear-mongering with any of that. I need to be so clear. I'm just kind of curious, kind of thinking about where this could go, or where it should go even.
I think it's also just, again, to tie it back, it's not about Doctor Who, that this is just more of a general science fiction and storytelling thing, that, like, you know, stories outside of Doctor Who, that there are progressive and more, like, stories that are considering this in a humane and considered way of, like, how we treat body horror and how we treat othering people. And I think that there are definitely ways that you can rewrite Doctor Who monsters to tell stories in that way. Like, I know that there are, I don't know, I'm not too familiar with extended universe Cyberman stuff, but I know that there's lots of fan works that present the Cyberman upgrading and all that as, like, in a positive way.
Oh yeah.
So I think that there's plenty of opportunity to tell interesting and good stories that use...
I wrote a very bad story doing that once, I remember, because it is such an interesting idea. Yeah.
Oh, well, that's amazing. That's perfect. Yeah. I think there's ways that it can be done that, you know... But also, I do also think that there will be probably a step away, at least for RTD2, a step away from that kind of thing, like the Max Capricorn and John Lumick type things.
I love how you put that, because what you're saying here is where it's getting framed a lot as kind of locking out stories is how a lot of people are thinking of it. It can do the exact opposite. It can kind of introduce new stories. One of my very, very, maybe my favorite Cyberman story, or probably not, but it's one of them, is The World Shapers comic by Grant Morrison, which I don't really want to spoil it, I guess, for people, because I think it's awesome and so worth reading. But it configures kind of the telos, it configures the kind of the progress of the Cybermen differently. It kind of strips out some of the ideology the TV show has with the Cybermen and kind of posits a different scenario for them. And it's one of those Doctor Who stories that when I read it, it made me think of a whole aspect of the show in a totally different way. And now all TV Cybermen stories seem kind of worse to me because I've seen how this could be done. And even when Moffat's Series 10 finale name-checked it twice, kind of, it still was like, well, I kind of wish he was doing some of what Grant Morrison did there, because I think it's such an interesting way to look at the Cybermen. So there is that way that you're not necessarily losing anything. You can be gaining so much by configuring these things differently. But RTD didn't even really do anything here that you can even notice. So he's not really. It's like when he's talking RTD and he's like saying this is 2023, this is Davros now, I think the stuff you can do there, like dropping maybe some of the World War II associations of Genesis of the Daleks, or then again, like Gig said, Star Trek, Star Wars, sequel officer uniforms. We actually do have some World War II iconography in this minisode, I guess. But I think what RTD could do is kind of, what does a modern day Davros look like now? Like, what does a modern eugenicist look like? How can we deal with this sort of villain in a way that kind of hits a chord to 2023, 2024, 2025 viewers more than some World War II conceptions of eugenics might? Like, it might not be as good of a story maybe as Genesis, although it might be even better, but that would be an actual story to do. And I guess kind of the issue here is he didn't do any of that. He just kind of threw something up in a minisode behind the scenes thing. But yeah, you're totally right, Missy. It's not necessarily losing anything. It's opening new arenas of storytelling.
On the note of going back and rewriting stuff or like tweaking stuff, adding to stuff, I think it's worth being aware of kind of the almost like the pitfalls or the limitations in some ways, because I think with Davros and Genesis of the Daleks, I think often what you might see, I think with one thing that fans are kind of bringing out in response to RTD is, well, hang on, we can go back and you can treat Davros with nuance. You can write Davros in a way that grapples with his disability in a nuanced and sympathetic way, and it doesn't like impugn his disability as like the cause of his evil or anything like that. But I think sometimes what that misses is that often the ableism is kind of baked into the premise. Like, even if you go back and kind of like try to sort of ameliorate it. So if we look at Genesis of the Daleks, for example, a lot of people will kind of, especially now, I think a lot of people are going to try and pin a lot of this on Moffat in terms of the ableism surrounding Davros. Because in Moffat's last go at writing Davros, there was like a huge amount of stuff, like 12 ripping Davros out of his chair. But I would say that's not meaningfully different from Tom Baker physically seizing Davros's life support button and, you know, threatening to fucking kill him. You know, in both cases, this is the hero of the show abusing his superior mobility to threaten and hurt the disabled villain, right? This is like the first Davros serial this happens in. This is like the source text just got voted like 3rd best Doctor Who story ever in Doctor Who magazine. And of course, it is a serial that Davies name drops in this minisode and is doing all these homages to on children in need. So I think this sense of being pulled like by these bits from the past that we can't let go of, even as we're trying to like sort of distance ourselves from them and say, okay, we're updating them. It feels incomplete, I think, because it's never quite. It's always being pulled back and forth between one bit and the other, and not quite managing the full clean break.
Moffat, it's his fault. I agree. In more ways than one, basically. I love seeing this happen because I'm seeing some people that are like straightforwardly blaming this all on Moffat. You know, blame in the first place, they see this as negative, and then in the second place, they don't channel it towards the person who wrote the minisode. They channel it towards the person who wrote something in 2015. Anyway, Moffat did 2 things in that Series 9 premiere, which I see flagging up now. One is like what we're talking about. Davros gets ripped from his support unit. The 12th Doctor zooms around in his support unit. There's a lot of physical comedy going on there. Also, Davros opens his eyes. And so we kind of have this reconfiguration again of, I thought his eyes were just closed the whole time. He could open his eyes. Moffat's kind of reinterpreting the physicality of Davros there in a way that I think some people felt like it's the slippery slope. If he starts opening his eyes, who knows what's next? You know, we can change his whole body. Do you think, this is a real question too, do you think that physical comedy with Davros inspired RTD to do this?
We can only speculate. It didn't necessarily have to have happened in 2015 when RTD watched this, but like certainly in terms of the conversations that RTD mentions them having, like with the production team about bringing Davros back, I feel it's almost guaranteed that all of that stuff that Moff did will have come up. I mean, all those gags in that 2-parter about how Daleks only have one eye, and like, you know, Davros didn't invent legs and didn't give the Daleks legs, and how, you know, how physically impaired the Daleks and Davros are in all these different ways, and how there's only one chair on Skaro and all that stuff. Yeah, Moffat's having like a riot coming up with all the gags he possibly can about the Daleks. But, you know, the moment you put like a lens on that of, well, how does this rub off on like people who this kind of applies to, is that, you know, it starts to look kind of ugly, you know, and I think that's completely understandable, and I think it seems inevitable that will have probably come up in some degree. I think it's very funny to imagine that RTD saw this in 2015 and was like, okay, in 8 years I'm going to fix that, but that's probably not quite how it went down.
I love, because we're talking about Genesis and this minisode, and we've got all these like fascist aesthetics, I kind of love this idea of Moffat can kind of serve as he's like an Emmanuel Goldstein, like a 2 minutes hate, like we need to channel the hatred somewhere, and we don't want to channel it to RTD because he's running the show, and so we want to keep somewhat positive with him. But if we can just take a moment with every discourse to kind of blast the hate lasers at Moffat, we can kind of expunge ourselves of it a little bit. So I hope with every future RTD issue, like the thing to do with 2. I'm sure we can pin that on Moffat somehow. There's got to be a way that even with what RTD did in Series 4, there's got to be a way we can blame that on Moffat. The gender politics of the meta crisis stuff, hell yeah, I'm blaming that on Moffat. He's doing a comedy about someone getting cancelled. The media release for that mentioned gender politics. I'm blaming him for it. There's got to be a way. I like that he can serve as that, and honestly, he might even enjoy it because he likes suffering. So I think we're all winners there. RTD redoing the Daleks. Well, I know RTD himself is not doing it. It's Ben Cook and, you know, a host of other people. But getting the Daleks colorized and this kind of revisiting of Davros here, he's connecting with Classic Who in an interesting way, I think. Like, I think RTD is really seeing a use for it. Like, we have these 800-ish episodes of TV. Why would we just leave them alone? Like, it's a huge... I really like this, that it's being seen as a resource now. I think in RTD1, the old Doctor Who Confidential episodes trotted out the old Doctors and they had lots of clips of it, but it wasn't like it's not like RTD1 was really saying go buy Classic Who DVDs, was it? in the Moffat era, we eventually kind of started getting that. You like look at 2013 and Series 7 and missing episode recoveries. There was some kind of synergy there. And then from the 50th onward, we started getting a lot more classic Hui. Chibnall, I don't know, he did the Morbius thing. But RTD2, I think is really like saying, wait, we have, almost 1,000 episodes of TV here. The BBC already made those. They've already been produced. We've already spent the money on those. They exist now. Why just leave them? Like, we can actually use this. This can actually help us make money now. This can help us get brand awareness now, which I think is really, really interesting. But kind of the what goes with that is a kind of revisitation of how are we going to configure this? If we're actually trying to get people, young people watching 60s Doctor Who now, if we're actually trying this, not just as a somewhat perfunctory thing, as I think it was in the previous incarnation of New Who, if we're actually going, we want people to be watching Tom Baker and William Hartnell serials, what do we have to do to kind of make that all work? And I think part of that is the colorizations and the cut downs that RTD is persevering with. And I think part of it is also this kind of Davros thing of we got to change some stuff just to kind of say it's not like that anymore as well. Would you guys think that's kind of part of the impulse here, is the renewed relationship with Classic Who, or am I reaching?
I think it does lead to, I guess, maybe the difficulty, which is that obviously the original episodes with Davros looking the way he does are right there, and they're being foregrounded on iPlayer for you to go and consume. So like to go and if you're then going to go ahead in the main show and do like a hypothetical flashback to Genesis where he looked completely different, and then you're kind of inviting reactions from viewers like, wait, what? Which is why I think it's not going to necessarily involve that much of actively trying to rewrite or overwrite past stories, because I think that kind of thing, it is like the Morbius wank in Timeless Children. It's just so backwards looking. Whereas I think what we are seeing conversely with like this new version of the Daleks is an attempt to actually create something new in its own way. Like, we've got a new edit of it by Ben Kirk, and we've got new colours, which, for better or worse, they are certainly new colours. So it's creating a new experience for viewers, which is very distinct from just go back and look at iPlayer. So I think ultimately it is forward-looking, but it is conscious of the availability of like the back catalogue.
Yeah, I think stuff with Tales of the TARDIS does the exact same thing.
Yeah.
So I think that all works on the purely watching the episodes way, that they're getting people to come in and watch the new episodes in new ways with recolorizing and cutting them down in Tales of the TARDIS. But I think I do kind of agree with you, Neo, when you talk about the how what RTD is doing in this new minisode with Davros is sort of like a thing of looking back and being like, yes, we know that was arguably problematic, and this is what we're doing now to fix it. But I think, again, to just, if that message gets kind of muddled because of how weirdly placed the message is in a confidential of a minisode, it feels like this big Davros thing should be in an actual episode. It should just be, we're doing Davros now in a big Davros story, and this is how Davros is. So that it muddies it, yeah.
What comes to mind is also, RTD has said there's going to be a flashback to the 60s Toymaker in The Giggle. Obviously, there's stuff in that serial, most of which is missing, but there's stuff in that serial that kind of probably merits a let's have a serious talk, in a confidential episode today.
Yeah.
Actually, that's a good point.
But also, the thing there, though, is Genesis is not missing. Genesis is very watchable. Genesis is, other people really love that serial and watch it all the time. It's very foregrounded. The Toymaker, you can watch the last episode of it properly. You have to kind of root around to get the right DVD with that on it, but you can get it. The first three, good luck. There's a couple of different ways you can do it, and none are the most appealing option for normal people in the world. So I guess it's kind of mystified a little bit into the past there. And the way we're seeing Neil Patrick Harris, he's not wearing the clothes the old Toymaker was wearing. So I think what might have happened is we're not even using the word celestial. Like Chibnall didn't use that word in Series 12 when the Toymaker was referenced.
Big Finish don't really use it either, the word celestial, in their interpretations.
There's a way to do this where you kind of loudly and boldly are saying we're reconfiguring it and we're changing it, like I think RTD maybe wanted to do with Davros, or I think was kind of the idea he at least seems to be saying in the behind the scenes. And then there's a way of just, if it's that in the past, can we just kind of tweak it and do the new way and not kind of go into the past thing? And if some episodes are missing, that's even easier, which is what I assume is happening with the toy maker. And also just because I think RTD is less interested in like xenophobia than he's interested in disability politics, which, you know, he's got friends that are actors in wheelchairs and all sorts of things. He mentions, you know, other people on the production when he's talking about the inspiration to change Davros there. So I just think the things near and dear to different showrunners' hearts play a part of, like, you can obviously see that with Chibnall with dyspraxia as well. People have different issues they want to reconfigure in the show. But it's interesting to think if we start down the road of, and I think I'm all for starting for it. If we're starting down the road of, can we change thing in old Who, even new Who, not necessarily just classic, there's a lot you can do, and there's a lot that won't get done because I think just different writers are not going to care as much about different issues.
And also, when a serial is so much is missing, like the Toy Maker, you can just kind of, people aren't going to watch it, so you can just wing it. You don't have to make excuses, maybe the way that you might with a serial that is much more watchable and well known, basically.
And you can just put the Toy Maker in different clothes and kind of distance themselves from that. Whereas Davros, if you put him, if he's standing up, then it's kind of necessitating a kind of, well, what's going on here?
I think it also helps with the Toy Maker that, maybe partly because of the missing nature of the episodes, he's one of those things where the vague idea of him is more beloved than the actual substance. I think basically every subsequent interpretation of the Toy Maker has just been, well, it's really cool that there's a being that can play games and has all these cosmic powers, let's write that. And they're not so much referring back to all the shit like the Trilogic game and all that, like, shit from the actual serial, because it's like, God, who cares? You know, and also we can't really watch most of it. Whereas Davros is the opposite of that, of course. Davros, you know, so much of that is embodied in that specific performance, those specific visuals, and those have been, you know, kept semi-faithfully for quite a lot of years. You know, he was brought back in New Who with like a straight-up update of his original design.
So we've talked about Davros, Daleks, Cybermen, the Toy Maker, Zygons. We haven't mentioned Syl. I think the interesting thing here to ask is, are there other things you can see in Classic Who or New Who that could be changed, or RTD might want to change in the way that Davros is getting changed, or things that should be that you think won't be? Like, what do you think the other avenues of this are?
Retroactively recast Mickey with deep fakes in series 1.
I guess maybe we aren't the people to know. There might be stuff standing out to other people that they would like changed or ignored for good.
I think maybe a lot of the stuff in Classic Who that is kind of on that level of, I guess, on that level of problem is maybe stuff that has already faded over time, or stuff that hasn't really been revived as much as Davros has been revived. So it's kind of, maybe there are specific hangers on of concepts that are like, that have been much more persistent and are much more maybe beloved by fans, and you have to dig a lot deeper to get to, I guess, like the issues with. Well,
you and I, Gig, when we rewatched An Unearthly Child recently, were you struck by the Native American parallel that the first Doctor makes? That I'd forgotten that.
That is in the very first episode, isn't it? Like, it's the perfect thing. I mean, it's just a perfect example. I guess that is how it was, I guess, common to speak in those kind of like that kind of language and that kind of like a
very directly savages talk. Yeah,
imperial like color. Yeah, exactly. And that is keyed into the themes of the episode as well, because all these ideas of going back to see the cavemen, you know, people from one time going back to see another time, and likening that to the idea of like industrial progress versus like indigenous peoples. So, you know, the whole racism of it is like bubbling under there. You can't just like magic it away. But nonetheless, it's also a thing that people have just sort of like allowed to, I guess, slip into the annals of memory, I suppose.
I can't think of anything like specifically material like Davros, but I think it'll be more like, if things were going to change, it's just, and this is obvious of course, but it would be just the attitudes towards writing in the first place. Because a few like just before the minisode came out, I was randomly rereading a bit of the writer's tale, and it was RTD was talking about Max Capricorn. He said that he felt that the reveal was a bit naff because it's all this like 45 minutes of build up, and then surprise, it's a man standing there in a suit, like an evil businessman, and he felt that to give it more oomph, make it a bit more interesting, that he would design Max Capricorn in that sort of way. So I think that's the sort of thing that will change more. Not thinking like that.
There's something else I dislike about the minisode. I just remembered I wanted to talk about.
Yeah?
It's something a lot of Doctor Who has done, actually. It happened in Chibnall's era too, and I was very annoyed with it then. When we play hard with associating certain nationalities and accents with evil, that's kind of doing a similar thing to what we've been talking about, right? Like, I think there's a confusion here because Genesis of the Daleks is very World War II coded, and part of this new Davros seems to be saying, what if we weren't coding it so much as how the 70s did? Like, what if we're saying we've progressed beyond the associations of facial scarring and wheelchairs and disability with evil? So you're moving forward with that, but then we're like moving backward into, wouldn't it be funny if he spoke even more German? And it's like, Nazi Germany. Like, it reminds me of some of the who would you rather exterminated, Sontar or Russia stuff from like Chibnall's run. And it twigged at me weirdly here because I feel like if you're going forward with, we're not doing just the 70s thing with Davros, but you're going backward with, but it's like Fawlty Towers, like he's a Nazi. Look, he talks German and he walks around in a Nazi-ish way. I kind of feel like that's going backward. Like if we're trying to go forward with what's a modern day eugenicist look like, then why are you going backward with they have a funny Nazi uniform and they speak really German? It's very, if nothing else, it's just very lazy comedy, I think.
I think the accent thing I found odd because, I mean, Bleach hasn't really pushed it very much like that in his previous performances, has he? Like, I don't remember him being like, he wasn't, sorry, he wasn't doing it that much. It almost feels like it could have not necessarily even been like that much of a conscious thing. Because it feels almost like he's doing this voice that's so mannered, and it just like almost like lapses into this weird kind of like quasi vague accent that's going on. It doesn't feel like something that's being like deliberately played up for laughs, and it also feels like something that maybe could have been like tightened up directorially, because it just doesn't seem to add anything. It's very strange because he's not actually doing the same kind of accent and voice that he did in his previous appearances. So I think it's a very weird detail. Regarding the whole, we're super playing up the Nazi uniforms and Nazi haircuts and all of that, I think that's a perfect example of like the symptoms of the fact that this is still very much stuck in this like worship of Genesis of the Daleks and the past and the old iconography, even as it makes these, I would say, kind of superficial gestures towards evolving it. And so, yeah, I think it's not a complete transformation.
You know, when Moffat and Harness did the Zygon episodes, at least they didn't have the Zygon speaking with the accent of who they were coding those with.
Oh, God.
Can I say just, I feel awkward because I didn't notice that he sounded more German, and I feel like I'm the only one who didn't pick it up on it. It just sounded like Davros to me.
Well, there's that aspect, isn't it? If, like Gig's saying, maybe if just because the voice isn't as changed, that was it always there? I
think he just has like a few like specific words, like tiny little bits where I think the accent like lapses a little bit, and he like enunciates like at the end of like a sound in a way that he wouldn't usually do, I think. So I think that's kind of why maybe why it flags up in some people's like awareness, maybe not in others. Like it's not super full grounded in my opinion, but I think there is a weird, slightly odd like flabbiness to it there.
The last kind of classic Who issue I have is something happens in the behind the scenes thing that I hate so much. It's maybe my least favorite, one of my very least favorite things that Doctor Who fans, even David Tennant, do is the old, hey, back in the 70s, the sets wobbled. Or back in the 60s, the Daleks were cheaper. I might sound insane getting so annoyed by this, but I hate it so much. It's can you guys unpack it, or do I have to unpack it? Why? I don't know if it annoys you two as much as it annoys me, but why does this annoy some people like me?
Well, the revival started in 2005, right? And it's been going mostly uninterrupted since then. I think we all ought to be used to the concept by now that things change, and you know the old show was produced in different circumstances, and you know, it's not inherently some hilarious thing that at some point earlier on in the show's history sets weren't made the same way and things weren't like done the same way. I think it's incredibly trite, I think, to just say like, oh wow, this is modern and old things are old. Whoa, hilarious. You know, it's like it's time entirely wasted that you could spend saying real things and making real jokes, expressing real thoughts and opinions.
It doesn't annoy me as much as it annoys you, but it feels very similar to that type of fan who's like, Doctor Who's always been terrible, and that's why we love it. Because Doctor Who's always sucked and it's never been good. It's like, okay, that's a weird thing to say, to be a fan of.
Something that's genuinely unpleasant about that, I think, is it often ends up in like denigrating the real work that people put into the classic episodes. Like, you know, sometimes they look quite good in various ways. Like the first shot of the very first episode, An Earthly Child, with the fog swirling around the policeman, it looks great. You know, there are some genuinely, honest to God, like really well executed visuals throughout Classic Who. So it's just so like unpleasant to just try and tar it all with this brush of, oh, it all looked shit and it was crap and that's hilarious and it's complete laughing stock. Like, stop it, go away. You're supposed to like this show. Yeah.
It reminds me of the Otto Octavius thing we were talking about earlier, where it's kind of this, hey, if I laugh at myself, they can't laugh at me. You know, if I, the nerd, make fun of myself, the bully can't make fun of me because I already did it. It's like Eminem at the end of 8 Mile, isn't it? It's if I say it's shit, then they don't win anything by saying it's shit. So if I get out of the way and say it's bad, no one else can say it's bad.
Definitely.
The thing is, it's not necessarily bad. Like it's not like the set builders were like awful and untrained. It's a money issue, right? It's not like no one knew what they were doing. I hope, at least most of the time. It's that there were limitations to what they could do. The Dalek is an incredible design. Even the ones that might have, you know, physical issues, maybe they are a bit ratty and tatty or whatever, they still look great. It's an incredibly fantastic design. Most of the different Dalek designs we've had. So I don't like this kind of. I'm not having an extended go at David Tennant here. This was a 10-second thing he said on a thing. It's just kind of a thing I see fans repeat all the time, and so it just kind of annoyed me because it's something I see said constantly. The wobbly old sets weren't meant to be wobbly, and a lot of those wobbly sets look good as long as no one is leaning on them too hard. So I don't find that like the fountain of comedy to be like it was cheaper then, and it's because it's kind of all. I rewatched the Doctor Who Confidential for Rose the other day, and it annoyed me how much. Obviously, there was a really good reason to do this then, but so much of it is Classic Who was bad and we're good now. Classic Who was cheap, now we have money. So much of the Confidential, like the actual package of it, was basically reading between the lines. The show used to be bad, we know that. It got cancelled, people didn't like it. Now it's the opposite, now it's expensive, now it's good. And that, I guess, needed to be said in 2005, but we're so beyond that now. Like Gig said, Classic Who was good a lot of the time, and I don't like that it was supposed to be shit thing, because it actually wasn't supposed to be shit, and a lot of the times it wasn't shit. And
it's just the least interesting thing you could say about an episode. Like if you like, oh, they used bubble wrap for the arc in space. It's like the most mindless, like, who cares bit of the arc in space. Like, look at the entire rest of that story. It's just a trite, uninteresting observation that's also frequently wrong.
I think what you say about getting ahead of the criticism before it can come, like, I think that is very true, and I think it is the insecurity, basically, that people will laugh at you and mock Doctor Who. and what it leads to is this refusal to actually see each individual bit of Doctor Who's history in terms of what it actually is, and only seeing it in this very flat sense of it in terms of, oh, okay, well, this 60s TV is bad because it doesn't look like 2005 TV or like 2020 TV. And that is incredibly, and that's just a meaningless way of looking at anything, because you're not actually looking at what the product actually is. You're looking at this fake, I guess, imaginary construct of of how, like, things now don't look like that anymore. So it's just, it's like taking on that, I guess, that superficiality that you're worried about other people projecting onto Doctor Who and absorbing it into yourself, so you can, like, mock Doctor Who and be quite, unkind to it, to, like, preemptively block the criticisms. And it's just so ridiculous. You don't need to lower yourself to that level.
I also think that's where a lot of attitude towards the new colorizations come from, where it's like, oh, we need to put this in color because people are going to make fun of it if it's in black and white. People are going to make fun of it if it's, like, 6 parts long. It's like, okay, well, they're not going to watch it. Like, so you like that story? Just that's okay. You're allowed.
Depending on what colours you put into it, people might make fun of it anyway. I mean, I'm just going to preemptively put that out there. Looking at some of these preview images.
That's true.
To be fair to RTD's specific motives with the colorization, he said that a very astute producer said to him that children will not watch anything in black and white. Like, that's just a hard barrier. So if you want children to watch this, you have to do something, and that's kind of what inspired this, as we've now learned, a series of colorizations that he wants to embark on. So it's not necessarily like a real contempt for black and white, but just a recognition that I guess that barrier has kind of been inculcated in kids. Like they're so used to colour that it's such a big like leap, I guess, to change to black and white. It's just such a thing. So I think like I respect that. You know, he just wants to mount that barrier. He wants to open up some degree of accessibility there. I think it makes sense in a lot of ways. And you can quibble about the execution, and I'm sure I will. But I think there are sympathetic aspects to what's being done.
No, yeah, I agree.
If we're being sympathetic, while we're in this mood, can we talk about Murray Gold's music for Destination Skaro?
No, because I'm not sympathetic to that at all. What did you think of it?
Oh, I love silly Murray Gold music, so I was having a great time. I've got a whole playlist of it. It's great.
Oh, yeah. Right. Hold on.
I thought the beginning bit with Davros, that was okay. It was like, there's some like synthy pad stuff I don't really remember, but it was like, it fit the vibe of the scene quite well when it was like a serious Davros describing the Daleks moment.
Observe a bonded polycarbide shell, a ruby ray blaster, and a multi-dexterous claw capable of annihilating 1,000,000 fowls. My ultimate masterpiece of design.
I'm not able to speak on the latter half of the music because we're in sympathetic mode.
I would say, as music, I think it's I don't really have some huge objection to it as music, like by itself. I think it's doing that thing that a lot of, I guess, the weakest moments of Doctor Who's soundtracking kind of do, which is that it's not necessarily being attentive to the actual like beats of drama or comedy in this case, like the actual like the dialogue, what's happening. It's just running in the background, doing its own thing, and it's like it's been just superimposed. And it's not necessarily like an active player or character in the scene. It's like it's just kind of doing it. And I think this has happened before, because I think in Husbands of Riversong, there's this big scene where the Doctor pretends that he's going into the TARDIS for the first time to try and like mislead River, and he does this. Capaldi does this whole like comic monologue there, but the music, it's almost like it doesn't have faith in Capaldi's performance to be funny, so it kind of starts doing like backflips and loop-de-loops, trying to be like, this is funny! This is the funniest fucking thing I've ever seen! And this minisode reminded me of that a little bit. I think it rarely ever works when you're trying to enhance the funniness by being like overly jocular with the music. I think generally funny music tends to be when you're doing something a bit unexpected, maybe with tone. Maybe you're just going silent, or maybe you're playing something that feels slightly out of place, and that makes it really, really funny.
I think that's like I want to say that this is like Murray Gold doing goofy comedy music for a Children in Need minisode is like the least important thing in the universe. It's like, it's fine. But it's like, I think it's kind of like a reaching a limitation for the maximalist Murray Gold approach to scoring, where it's like, if we get a comedy scene, it has to be the most comedy, and we get a dramatic scene, it has to be the most dramatic, blaring horns blazing thing, and so it doesn't always work.
I would say again, it's just another symptom of like general stretched thinness, in my opinion. I think like it's not nothing in this is working on maximum full cylinders.
Do you guys hate Bootstrap paradoxes? Because I do.
I'm certainly starting to, because I've realised them in a while back that they're like easy mode, like time travel writing and jokes now. You can just do them in like 2 seconds and say, oh, this is so profound, isn't it? And actually, no, it's not. Like, I think Before the Flood was like the final straw with them for me.
Yeah, it's like a Bootstrap paradox. Again, I just want to say this every time I say something. This is a Children in Need comedy, and so who cares?
Yeah.
But a Bootstrap paradox is like the base, and you should build a story on that. Like, take any of Moffat's Bootstrap paradoxes, where the Bootstrap paradox was like step one, and then there was like actual genuine character and story evolving out of the Bootstrap paradox, where just like the simple existence of a Bootstrap paradox that you then turn around and go, oh look, it's a Bootstrap paradox, is just meaningless. Like in Before the Flood, where it's like, oh, the whole point of that story is just, this is a bootstrap, it's a bootstrap.
And just to locate it back within this little minisode again, I think the fact that the joke about that is just that we're messing up canon, that in itself is pretty, like, I mean, it's not that much of a joke. It's just a thing. It's just there. It's like, oh, yeah, you're messing up canon. You're doing canon loops. Haha. It's really messed up, isn't it? You need comedy on top of that for it to actually be funny, basically.
I think bootstraps are annoying because they're kind of a none thing in the first place. It's like there wasn't an actual source for this. It's kind of negating a story in some ways. So I think the only times they really feel satisfying to me is if there is a kind of thematic weight to the idea of the kind of origin of something being confused. There's a children's fantasy story I don't want to mention, but it kind of is saying something about self-reliance and like one's place in the world through how it does one. And then in, I guess, Matt Smith's whole arc thing, like it is kind of trying to say something about your impact, which is kind of Matt Smith's arc in general was playing thematically a lot with, are you actually considering what effect you're having on the universe, Doctor? And so I think some of the kind of stuff that happens in the time of the Doctor, you can kind of see it's sort of trying to play into some of those themes of like unintended impacts of, you know, your actions go beyond you and that. But then like Lake Flood, Capaldi acting, Capaldi guitar, talking to the camera, like there's so much cool stuff going on there that I think it just about gets away with. This is such a boring idea. And we're literally explaining it to you like your children. Like I'm talking to you to the camera to explain this thing, which I'm sure even series 1 did at least one example of somewhere. Like it's a kind of a throwaway sci-fi thing. I don't think it's a big gag or like something to base your whole plot around.
Yeah, the fact that, like you describe, it's the negation of a story. So if you're making that your story, you know, you have a challenge you need to overcome because, you know, you can't just leave it at that. I think it's one of those difficulties because time travel itself, because as soon as you're like troubling the nature of cause to effect, like point A to point B, and starting to loop things together like that, you know, you're actually running into a problem of like, well, what is your actual world now? What does it actually make of the idea of characters growing or things even happening to them? I think it starts to unwrite the basic logic of existing in reality and rules, which is why if you don't like start to work a bit more sophisticatedly, like with metaphor and stuff, then you just end up going in circles and doing stories that are about fucking nothing, like that fucking Netflix show Dark, which I'm still mad about the fact I watched every episode of it years after it finished.
I think the nun story thing is really bad in a frothy comedy minisode because it's a nun joke then. Like, you can do a joke. It wouldn't be a joke I'd like, but you can do a joke with, like, why the plunger is there. But it's not even... They don't even really make the easy joke here. It's just he grabs one. And, like, so that's where the plunger came from. It's, like, literally just the Daleks have a plunger and I have a plunger. So that's where the plunger... It's not even doing bathroom humor with the plunger, really. It's... I know the minisode, the Confidential does, but it's like... It's no joke. It's just a circle. And so... Even in like a frothy thing like this, it's not really accomplishing much besides fans going, oh, so it came from there. It didn't come from anywhere.
Yeah, I wanted 5 minutes on the creation of the plunger. I didn't want the Doctor just going in the TARDIS and grabbing a random plunger and just throwing it in, because that's grabbing it from nowhere. That's such a missed opportunity for humour and fun. It's like, oh, again, this needed like 10 more drafts and it'd be really funny.
Speaking of like frothiness and minisodes and bootstraps, we compared them earlier, but Time Crash has a bootstrap to like wrap it up, and so does not to bring up more cancelable Moff stuff, but so does the 2-part Space and Time, and those are like those are like the bootstraps are there, and there's comedy mined out of the bootstraps, but also there's things that aren't just the existence of a bootstrap. So yes, it's just that you guys are right. This needed more drafts and to be more funny.
Maybe it should have been left in the drafts.
I liked Julian Bleach's physicality. I thought he was good in it. Yeah,
it's a good opportunity to see him actually do that, because he hasn't got to do that before because he's been in the support unit. So, you know, there's a new dimension to his performance potentially there. So we'll have to see if they ever bring him back again for a real episode.
The thing is, you keep saying Julian Bleach, the both of you, but the ever trustworthy British press identifies a different man as playing Davros in this minisode. So The Independent, which is no small outlet, in its article, David Tennant returns as Doctor Who and lands TARDIS during BBC Children in Need. It identifies an entirely different man as playing Davros. So after the first 3 paragraphs just saying, oh, Tennant's in this, it says, Christopher Eccleston, the actor who played the Time Lord before Tennant first took over the role in 2005, made a cameo in the special as the Khaled scientist Davros, who is the evil creator of the Daleks. This isn't a 1-paragraph mistake. All through the article, it keeps identifying Davros as Eccleston. It even has like a captioned photo of like Julian Bleach identifying him as Christopher Eccleston, former Time Lord. There's not much curiosity here. Like, it's not bringing up why is Eccleston working with RTD again? Why is Eccleston returned to play an entirely different character in a 5-minute comedy minisode? The Independent isn't that interested, but the Independent is very confident that that was Christopher Eccleston.
It's like the kind of mistake that like ChatGPT would make, except a human obviously made it. Possibly even multiple humans. Very, very bizarre.
It says, well, RTD, why are you worrying about representations of Davros when clearly people aren't even like recognizing who the person standing there is?
Well, the last thing is Destination Skaro is kind of a... like Gig said, it does open connecting to Liberation of the Daleks in that the fast return switch is set to... Well, it's screwed up and it's going to Skaro after Liberation. There's also... It is kind of thematically connected, the two stories, in that Liberation is all about Dalek iconography, and Liberation is all like... It's like a simulation, like simulation rooms and things that... it's like a panopticon of Dalek simulations that like 14 goes through, and it's like going off the old Dalek comics. It's all Dalek iconography. And then like this is that too, but more comedically and less Alan Barnesy. So I don't really know what there is to say there, but at least they kind of feel linked. I
find myself questioning what the point was of this meticulousness regarding the opening hour of the 14th Doctor, because in this minisode we have this thing, the Doctor says, 60 minutes ago I was a woman, right? And it was been kind of stressed that the story of Liberation of the Daleks takes place over the first hour of the 14th Doctor's lifetime. And I guess the point of that is that, like, you know, it has to just be an hour, so that there's still a sense of immediacy when we get into the Star Beast. But any immediacy, I think, from that, and like from us launching into the 14th Doctor's life, has kind of dissipated. Because the opening hour of his life, these first adventures, this comic and this minisode, are just such vague, frothy filler, like which are, we feel more distanced from the 14th Doctor in this way, I think, because they're not really, and the comic is not really concerned with his interiority, really. The comic is just it really is just like a complete, like inconsequential, flippant, like every 5 pages there's some wacky thing happening, kind of classic comic. It's not really like it doesn't feel like a full-fledged 14th Doctor story, and neither does this minisode, obviously. So I think it's very strange. Like, what is the point of actually having such specific constraints? Like, this is all going to take place within the first hour, if you're actually just not going to really bother that much in maintaining the sense of, like, medias res. You know, it just, it's very odd. It's like, I wonder, is he trying to create a deliberate sense of distance with the past era in having this comic in this minisode and all this, like, this fluff, these random events just happening to 14, and then we start once we're already well into the 14th Doctor's life? But if that's the case, why the 1 hour thing? Why not allow for even more like Big Finish audios and shit in this gap? I suppose you could maybe put them after Destination Skaro, but I feel like that would defeat the point of the 60-minute thing. So yeah, I'm just wondering. It's really strange set of decisions.
The most recent annual does jam a story in between Power of the Doctor and Liberation, so it can be done.
Oh god.
Okay. Right, Jesus. Okay.
Yeah, it is this weird attitude. It's like weird, like wanting to have your cake and eat it too, but like the two things you want are weird choices. So why do you want to have your cake and eat it? Of like having this immediacy between Power of the Doctor and the Star Beast, but also jamming adventures in there. I vaguely remember, wasn't there something like RTD was hyping up the Liberation of the Daleks comic because it was like, it wanted to show that 14 was a proper Doctor. Am I right? Is that a thing?
Yeah.
Like, he was like a proper Doctor. And I was just thinking, like, the treatment of like, he's a proper Doctor because he has the comic and this minisode and whatever that thing in between Liberation, Power of the Doctor and Liberation of the Daleks was. It feels like a very like universe brand way of defining a Doctor. Like, oh, we need him to be a proper Doctor, so he needs to have content. Like, it doesn't have to be good. It doesn't have to we need his content, and then that's what makes him a good Doctor, like a proper Doctor.
And the effect has been, in my opinion, to make him feel a bit less real, like less like a real Doctor and more like an interchangeable vessel for content. you just have anything happening to him. It feels like we're never going to get those first moments with the new Doctor, like properly having a first proper adventure after coming into life, like we've had with some of the previous Doctors. And that's just been consigned to this random little comic that's not really fussed with that at all. You know, in the first pages of the comic, he just looks at his hand and he's like, okay, cool, next, let's go adventure. So, I mean, on one hand, cutting out all the post-regenerative bullshit, that's great, that's fine. But on the other hand, not really having like a proper first story, it distances us from him as a character, I think. And obviously that won't matter once the Star Beast airs and we get proper stories and stuff. But it's still, it's just a weird way to undermine, I think, the start of the Star Beast. Like, it's so unnecessary.
Yeah, it's a weird attitude. Like, you can just establish a new Doctor by establishing a new Doctor in that story. You don't need to have all this weird ancillary stuff as well to, like, prove it. It's like, he'll be the Doctor in the Star Beast, and we know he will.
Funny thing with Liberation is, I think it's what some fans want the giggle to be. Like, it's not good, for one thing, and it's really, really, really concerned with, like, these layers on layers of, like, matrixy psychoplasm, like, artificial reality, like, consciousness projections of, like, and it's doing all that sci-fi crap to kind of be like, ooh, you remember thing, and, you know, that's, nostalgia, and some people think of past thing this way, and some people think of past thing that way, and it's very nothingy. It's not really saying anything, but it's like, hey, we've got a kind of smart sounding reason to, like, throw up the Emperor Dalek, and, you know, all these different, the comic one, and the evil of the Daleks, and we've got all these reasons to bring in these different designs and all these, like, little visual cameos from different comics and things. But also we're making quite a statement, aren't we? We're the past and something, you know, nostalgia and something, and people's thoughts, something. Like, I hate that sort of storytelling 9 out of 10 times. I think there's a way to do it well, but it's very hard. And I think it's mostly used, especially in this, like, multiverse era, just to kind of hand wave, like, we've got a reason for bringing, like, actually these Spider-Men are together to say that fans, something. You know, it's just kind of like I don't think there's actual things getting said here when people are like, the giggle should be about, it's RTD condemning the toxic nostalgia of making an episode like the giggle in the first, like, it makes zero sense. It's just trying to, like, I think, smarten up. It's like what we were saying before about you bully yourself and they can't bully you. If you say your Doctor Who is a critique of Doctor Who, it kind of allows you to enjoy it, I guess, because you're saying, well, I'm not enjoying Doctor Who because my Doctor Who is about Doctor Who bad. And so I'm actually a smart and clever fan because it's bad, so I can say it's good. Like, I just think it's really crap storytelling, and it's part of why I think Liberation doesn't work, is it's just so up its own ass with, like, this, Dalek, but we're not just throwing Dalek iconography around. This isn't a Briggs audio, even though Briggs makes a cameo in it. This isn't a Briggs audio, this is an Alan Barnes story where we're saying things. And are you? Yeah,
I think to be able to do a critique of nostalgia, you have to actually be able to critique nostalgia, and you have to be, you know, capable of writing a critique of nostalgia in the first place. You have to have enough of a skepticism of nostalgia that you don't just indulge in it, like, uncritically and, like, hedonistically all the time. I think that's going to be very difficult for a lot of Doctor Who fans and Doctor Who fans turned writers. So, yeah, I don't expect much quality in that regard.
Yeah, I'm trying to think how to recap, like, the issues 8 through 14, but it basically just is, it's like a classic Who turnaround of, we're in the simulation. Oh, now here's new information about the simulation. Here's more, like, funny Instagram photos of the aliens, except now they're actually in trouble. Here's lots of Daleks you recognize from different Dalek stories. Here's 14 using 13's sonic and spaceshipy things happening. 13's sonic gets, what's the onomatopoeia there? Fizzarked. So it, like, cracks and it destroys, like, it's lasered, ruby ray laser. So that's a tragedy, or whatever you want to call that. 14 says, see you later, exterminator, to the Emperor Dalek. There's a big explosion at the end. I'm not really making this sound that inviting, am I? 14 gets away, but there's all stuff melted over 13's TARDIS, which is still, like, there, but the fast return switch has got all the goo over it. And so that's how we lead into Destination Skaro, with the last panel being 14 saying, wouldn't want to go back to Skaro in a hurry, in, like, a red time vortex. So, yeah.
I think worth addressing the elephant in the room here. The only reason stuff like this can pass as the new Doctor's first story is that it's not a new Doctor, it's David Tennant again. So they don't have to actually bother. I think they don't feel they have to actually bother. I mean, there is no fucking way that, like, Shooty's Doctor would have like stuff like this being his first official contact. I mean, it's just unthinkable.
Yeah.
It just doesn't wash at all. So I think so again, it's a sense of this isn't actually a real Doctor. It unrealifies 14 in a way that I think is unfair. That kind of doesn't do justice to the concept, really.
Also, 14 doesn't really solve the plot exactly. Like, it's mostly tied up, but then he leaves like his companion to actually deal with what's meant to happen with like everything left from the story and like the simulation stuff. So for all of, like, it was extended, like it has 14 issues, not 13, but it still doesn't really even end itself. It was pretty dissatisfying, all things considered.
He had to go to children in need as fast as possible. Okay, he had to get out of this story. He was in a hurry. Like, you can't blame him. The character is not at fault for this.
I don't think I made this clear, but something really bizarre with the comic is we talked about months back that, 14 starts off with 13 Sonic and that gets destroyed early on in the comic run. But in this last chapter, he is like a replica of 13 Sonic and he uses it in the plot, to magic away the save the day and everything. And then it gets destroyed again. So he got 13 Sonic twice and it got destroyed twice.
Yeah, God willing, forever.
It's a slightly confusing time before the Star Beast actually airs, but hey, there's not long left. And as always, RTD gives us so much to talk about every time. And so that's the real RTD era being back thing, isn't it? That we're never going to run out of Discourse ever again. I think he's even better at Moffat than generating it, to be honest.
This is only a taste of what's to come. I mean, this is nothing. This is just a minisode. Just imagine the kind of Discourse we will have in the next few episodes, in the next series. Like, it's just an absolute fountain. Isn't that exciting?
Yeah.
It's like Discourse about the show splits into two things at once, isn't it? We talk about the show and we talk about how RTD talks about the show. I wish there was a better word for that.
Yeah, like, what would you call that? Like bifurcation? That kind of thing? Something by...
Yeah, bifurcation. Let's stick with that one. Yeah.
We can wrap up for now, yeah.
Yeah, and so that wraps up our discussion of Destination Skaro, a liberation of the Daleks too, I suppose, and all that other Dalek-y and Russell T Davies-y goodness. Please let us know what you thought of any and all the stuff we discussed, or things we didn't get to, or things you think worth bringing up on the sort of topics we were talking about. We always love to read all that. And yeah, thank you very much for listening. Cheers.